So before we go into the webinar, let me introduce myself. My name is Dinesh and I have nearly 10 years of experience in JavaScript technology. Currently I am working on its latest technologies like Angular.js, Node.js and MeanStack. So first, what is the objective of this session? So here we'll get to know why do we need to use this Angular.js framework. Because normally in our traditional web application, what we will be doing is we'll be using our pure JavaScript to write the client-side validations or to just post the data to the server. Maximum we'll be using jQuery. That's it. Then why do we need to use this kind of MVC framework on our UI? So that we will be discussing in our session. Next one, what is Angular.js? Then in our server side, we can use this MVC or other architecture. But how does it make sense if we use it in our client side? And what does it mean by MVC? Or if you see it in Angular.js page, they will be mentioning MVW. So what does it mean by MVW? Then we will be discussing some of the Angular.js feature. At last, we will be building an Angular.js application. This is the objective of our today's session. First slide, why Angular.js? So if you see, normally in our traditional web applications, we will be using only jQuery. So jQuery is a normal DOM manipulation thing, right? So if you want to perform any other operations, you have to manipulate your DOM. So like DOM manipulation means we will be having classes and IDs in our document. So on the document, we will try to find that specific ID. On this specific ID, what is the value available? So we will be taking that value, that we will be doing some kind of operation. This is what we are calling it as a DOM manipulation. But if you do this DOM manipulation, that is not that much good and it won't improve the performance also. So instead of that, however, I am doing data manipulation in our server side. So in server side, we never play around with this DOM. You will be having the data, we'll modify the data and we'll be giving it to the UI. So UI just render the data. In the UI side also, I want to perform in the data side. I don't want to do any other DOM manipulation. So I want to do all the things in the data manipulation. So how can I do this? So if you want to do this kind of data manipulation on the client side, for that you need a JavaScript framework. Otherwise you have to write everything in your core JavaScript. That is really difficult. Instead of that, to do all the DOM manipulations, we will be using a JavaScript frameworks like Angular.js, Knockout.js or Ember.js. Okay, so we have these many JavaScript framework out there. Then why do I need to choose Angular.js over it? So if you see Angular.js, it will be having more number of modules available out there. So for example, if I want to build some kind of drag and drop, I don't need to write everything from the scratch. Already people has built some kind of modules. Those modules will be available in the Bower. Just you can take that module, include it in your application as a dependency, then directly you can use it. In the same way, we have n number of users for Angular.js. So what is the advantage of having more users? So if there are more users means, if you are getting stuck anywhere or if you have any other queries, you can post it in the social medias or just forums. Over there, more people are using it, they will be answering for those questions. So it will be helpful for us. That's why whenever you are choosing a framework, you have to look how many modules we have and how many people are using this Angular.js. So if you compare with other frameworks, more users are using this Angular.js on their application. In the same way, we have nearly 3000 modules on Angular.js. So those 3000 modules are approved modules. There is no bugs or nothing. If we have a bug also, that is really minor bugs. So that's why we have to go for a Angular.js frameworks over other frameworks. So let's go to the next slide. So what are all the challenges of web development? So first, before in a 10 years back or 12 years back, we will be seeing our web pages only in the desktop, nothing else. But now, what is happening is, people are using tablets, mobiles and other things. They want to see this web application in everything. So I can't build the application only for the system or only for a mobile like that, right? So whatever the page I'm building today, it has to render on all the devices. So that is one of the biggest problem we have in the development. Next one, diverse of the user. The same way we'll be having multiple, they will be using different size of devices and they will be all around the world, right? So everywhere this application should support. Next one, agility. Today I will be developing particular page. What will happen? Tomorrow my client will be coming, okay, I don't want to do this kind of page, just change it, change the requirement. I want to implement this one. So if you are keep on there changing the requirement, means in traditional application what you have to do, you have to throw all the code and take the new requirement and implement it. That is really difficult. I want to cope up over there. Whatever the already I built over there itself, I want to make some small changes and I want to get the new requirement also. So that is also one of the biggest challenge we have now. The last one is multiple skill sets, right? So if I want to build one small things, what I want to know is, as a UI developer, you have to know HTML, CSS, Bootstrap and other things, right? So we have to have multiple skill sets people also. That is also one of the challenge. Whoever working as a manager, they will get to know, okay, if I want to deliver one simple project, I have to recruit like 3 or 4 people with multiple skill sets. That is also difficult. So to overcome everything, we have this Angular.js. So Angular.js will overcome all the troubles. One is the responsiveness. If you build any application with Angular.js, it will be rendered on all the devices. That doesn't matter. It is not like it will support only in the system or it will support only in the tablets. So if you want to view it in all different devices, what you can do, you can include normal Angular stack. So Angular stack is a Angular with Bootstrap combination. So Bootstrap will be having this responsiveness, so you can view it in all kind of devices, and this Angular stack will be having its own functionalities. The same thing, agility. So agility also you can add it, because each and everything you will be having it as a controllers or separate directives, right? So in the directives, if your user is coming up with a new requirement, each and everything is a separate module. So you can include one more module or you can remove this kind of module. So that is also you can accomplish with that. And multiple skill sets also is not available, because only the JavaScript. It is not like a rocket science or anything. So just only the JavaScript, they made some kind of syntaxes over there. So we'll be using that syntaxes to accomplish the functionalities. So using Angular.js, we can overcome all the challenges we are facing in this web development. Next one is, what is Angular.js? So people are, whenever I speak to people, so they are keep on telling, okay, so Angular.js is a library, just something like a jQuery or _JS. First one, Angular.js is not a library. Angular.js is a framework. On top of this Angular.js, you can build your applications. First, we have to understand this. It is not a library. So library means it will be having some set of functionalities. Just include the library and use the functions. That's it. But framework means on top of this framework, you can build your application. It will be having everything whatever you required for your application. It is not specific to only one functionality or only one module. That is the main thing you have to understand about Angular.js. Next, the continuation of what is Angular.js. So Angular.js is a open source client-side JavaScript framework created by Google. Actually, it is created by Misko Hevery on 2009. Later, what happened? This Google guys has bought it from the Misko Hevery and they made it as a open source framework. So whoever wants, they can take this Angular.js, and if you want to contribute for this Angular.js community also, you can contribute over there. Then why do I need to use this Angular.js framework? Because I'm much comfortable with jQuery or normal JavaScript. I'm not going to do any other business logics in my UI. Then why do I need to use it? So if you use this Angular.js, you will be having more control on our UI itself. Just take this example. I have a normal web page and I need to do some kind of small business logic. So just consider I want to do some sum of 2 numbers. That's it. Mostly we'll be doing it in the client side. Just if it is a little bit complex business logic, what you'll be doing, whatever data you are getting from the client or from the user, you will be posting these data to the server side. On the server side, you will be accomplishing that business logic and again give the response, show the response to the UI. So what is happening is you have to push the data to the client, server to client, again you have to push. It is taking time. Instead of that, if you are using this kind of frameworks, what you can do all the business logics on the client side itself. That is one of the biggest advantage. So because of doing it in the client side, it will be faster. It will be like a lightning fast because we are avoiding a server side call over there. So that is really costly. Next one is you can build all these AngularJS directives with normal HTML and JavaScript, nothing else. So if you see this AngularJS syntaxes, it will be looking like normal JavaScript syntax. If you want to write on-click functionality in JavaScript, you will be writing on-click some particular function name. In the same way, in AngularJS also you will be using ng-click some function name. It will call this AngularJS functions, right? So it is really similar to HTML and JavaScript. Next, so he's Misko Hevery who developed this AngularJS initially. So what he is telling is, you should not see this AngularJS as just a framework. So using this framework, you can build your own HTML elements. So what does it mean? For example, we have n number of HTML elements like input tag or p tag, h1 tag. So each and every tags having its own functionalities or its own style, right? So if I use the h1 tag, it is giving my text as bigger and bit bold. So if I use the input, it is making the UI like a text box. I can enter the text over there. So it is having the functionalities or the view. In the same way, you can create your own tag. So later what I will do, I will create my own tag, Dinesh tag, right? So Dinesh tag has to look like this. So it has to look like a drop down. On the drop down, whatever data it is showing, it has to do some kind of animation, tricks, that, this, everything. So I can mention these kind of things in my own custom tags. I should be able to create my own elements over here on HTML using this AngularJS. How can we do it? So if you want to create your own elements, you will be using custom. They are in YouTube, Sony PlayStation 3, they are using AngularJS. And next one, most of the people have seen this Paytm website. The Paytm website fully built by AngularJS. Okay, you can ask me, okay, it is working only on the browser. So what is happening in my mobile? In mobile also, they built this AngularJS. If you want to build a hybrid applications, you can build with AngularJS and Cordova or other things. That will be working on your mobile also. Same thing. Next, Netflix are using this AngularJS, and freelancer.com, the weatherchannel.com, these guys are using AngularJS. So how can I get to know whether these guys are using AngularJS or not? If you press this debugger tool, if you are using a Chrome or a Firefox, you will be having one option to view this debugger tool. So just view the debugger tool. On that you can see AngularJS on the root of the element. You can see ng app directive or that AngularJS file will be available. So you'll get to know, okay, this application is built on AngularJS. Next one. So what is single page application? Let's see what does it mean by single page application and how can we build a single page application. First, in our traditional applications, what we will be doing is each and every page navigation will hit our server. Server will redirect to the another page. So we'll be reloading the whole page again in our browser. So what will happen? Whatever data you had in your old page, that everything will be removed because we are changing the whole page. Then next page will be loaded. So two things you have to look over here. One is for just page navigation, you have to hit your server. Server has to redirect. That is really costly. Next one is, so you are not getting more flexible, right? For a if I want to make a next page, okay, I don't want to redirect to this kind of page. I want to move it to next page. So again, I have to call the server side developers, whatever it is, Java or .NET. Okay, you guys just change it over here. So they has to change and you have to implement whatever you need in the UI. That is really difficult. Now what I want to do, if I need to handle this page navigation, right? So for that we will be using AngularJS, this single page application feature. So how can we use it? In AngularJS, if you see, we will be having the routers. You can use ng router or UI router. So using this ng or UI routers, you can redirect to the page or you can navigate to the hierarchical data page also. So what does it mean by redirecting to the page or hierarchical data to the page? Okay, just let's take a basic example. First I have some kind of tabs, home tab, settings, contacts and other tabs. Whenever I click on this home tab, what I want to do, so I have some HTML called home.html. I want to load that HTML into this page. Next, if I click on the settings, I want to load that page. So in the traditional application, if I click on this, it will be anchor tag. Anchor tag will trigger a server side event. From server side event, we will be redirecting. Instead of that, we will be including one module called ng route or UI router. So if you include these modules as a dependencies to your application, you should be able to access these modules in your configuration. In your configuration, you can mention it. If my URL is /home, just load this page. If my URL is /settings, load the another page. You are handling everything in the client side itself. So in a single page, you are loading other pages as a partial pages. So your application, the main page will be only one. I can have it like an index.html or whatever it is. Next, remaining pages, whatever you have, you will be loading it as a partials. Just some particular div content or controller or these things only you will be loading. Okay, this is what we are calling it as a single page application. To accomplish this single page application in Angular.js, we will be using ng router and UI router. So I know we are covering only the theory. In end of the session, I will show you how to use ng router as well as UI router in our application. I can show you the programs. Next one, responsiveness in this single page application. First you have to see the support. Okay, now I built a Angular.js application which is full and full of JavaScript and HTML stuff. Whether will it be rendered in the mobile browsers? Is it possible? Or if I am building some kind of hybrid applications over there, will it be running in the browser mobile? So this Angular.js is like a normal JavaScript, so it will be running on all the devices. Next one, I want to make it as a responsive. You can see it on the slide. In the bigger screen, how it is looking. I have some kind of gaps over there and I have this tab. When you are seeing it in the small tablets, so everything will be shrinked, right? So otherwise it will be automatically aligned together. So for to implement these kind of logics, what we will be doing, we will be using Bootstrap CSS framework. That is totally responsive. You can use it for a fluid application as well as the responsive application. You can have this Bootstrap CSS with this Angular.js application and you can make this application as a fully responsive. Next, Angular.js in detail. Now the basic thing we have seen, what does it mean by single page application? Okay, now we have to build a single page application using this Angular.js. For that, I need to know this Angular.js bit more. Then only I can build it. So let's see Angular.js features and other stuff. Okay, so before get to this Angular.js feature, first I want to tell you what does it mean by MVC and MVW. You can see it in the Angular.js page itself. It is a MVW architecture. What does it mean by? So before, when we built this Angular.js, so they mentioned it as a MVC framework. MVC means model view controller. So model is whatever data you are handling it on the UI or the client side. So for example, I want to create a user application, right? So I want to display all the user information on the client. So I will make a query to this DB. The DB will be giving all the list of users, right? So that is the user, what we are calling it as a model. So that model will be using it. Next, view. View is nothing but HTML. It is a representation layer. So whatever you want to show it to the user, or if you want to get the information from the user, we will be writing the code. That is what we are calling it as a view. Next one is controller. So all the business side logics or validations, these kind of stuffs, we will be writing it in the controller part. In Angular.js also we will be having one controller. That controller only will be implementing all the business logic and validations. Okay, so this MVC is clear. What does it mean by MVW? If you see in the forums or all kind of webinars, you can see people will be fighting over it. Okay, Angular.js is not a MVC, it is a MVVM. VM means view model. So we don't have only the controller, we have the view model, right? View model means whatever data you wanted to bind it to the view, that we will be handling it over there. We will be processing those data. Okay, that is what they are calling it as a view model. So still this discussion is going on, so we are calling it as a MVVW. And next, in this instead of controller part, if you see, we have directives, services, factories, and other things. Okay, so let's go next. So before we go into this Angular.js feature, do you guys have any questions? If yes, we'll spend maximum 5 minutes for your questions. I will answer for your questions, guys. If you have any question, just post it in the question window. How do server interaction happens with the controller? Yeah, good question. So what you can do, you have the data you got the data from the user. I want to post the data to the server. How can I do? In Angular.js, we have one service called $HTTP. It will act like a normal HTTP only. So HTTP response, request and response you might hear. So it will act like a normal HTTP response in JavaScript. So this $HTTP request you can pass whether I want to post the data or get the data. You can pass the method and the URL and whatever data you want to pass. So we will be passing the data. It will be having two methods. One is success and error method. If it is posted the data properly and if you're getting the success response, it will go to the success method. Otherwise, 500 error or 404 error, if it throws automatically, it will go for the server. Error part, we can handle those error also in the client side without any other trouble. So we will be handling all the server side interaction with $HTTP module. From Hitesh, we have a question. Can we also do server-side validation using Angular.js? So we can't have any control on the server side, but before you post the data to the server, you can do the validations. Whatever things I need to have it for the server. So those validations you can do it on the client side, but you won't be having control on the server using this Angular.js. It is only for the client, not for the server side programming. From Ashish and Sai Kiran, we have a question. What does it mean by MVW? Okay, so it is not the direct meaning MVW. MVW means model view, whatever it is. Because I told you, right? So it can be a controller or it can be a view model. Keep on still, people are fighting on this, right? So they can't come to the conclusion. That's why they made it as a whatever it is. So you can consider it as a only controller or it can be a view model. So view model means in Angular.js we have this $scope variable. So what is this $scope variable? Whatever data you are getting from your backend, and that data only we are calling it as a model. That model we are assigning to the scope variable, and the scope variable you can access it on your view. So this is what we are calling it as a view model. It will be accessible only in your controller, right? So this particular data, what you will be accessing it in the view or will be modifying it in the view. So that's what we are calling it as a view model. So W doesn't stand for anything. That is for just whatever. So you can call it as a controller or a view model. So from Surender, we have a question. Angular.js internally using Bootstrap for responsive UI. No, Surender, it is not using Bootstrap for a responsiveness. If you want this Bootstrap, you can include it separately, so it won't block that. If you want this instead of Bootstrap.js, if you want to use this Angular.js itself, so you can use AngularStep module that will act like a Bootstrap.js. So from Virender, we have a question. What is it about security in Angular.js? So it is like all other JavaScript program only, because if hacker wants to hack, if you are having all the data, confidential data in the client, anyone can hack it, right? That is like a normal JavaScript, but the way you handle it, that does matters. So if you want to store some data in your local storage, or if you want to handle it, transfer the data, just use a module called bcrypt or crypto. So these kind of modules, what it will do, it will encrypt your data. You can encrypt the data and send it to the server side. In server side, you can decrypt it. So this is all about how we are writing our code in our client side. If you want to have a more security, you have to use these kind of external modules like a bcrypt. So if you ask me, I prefer bcrypt on it. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Features of Angular.js. So what are all the features we have it in this Angular.js framework? First thing, if you ask me, one is the data binding. If I want to build one application with jQuery, what will happen is I have my data in from the backend. I got some user information like an array. I got it over there. So what I wanted to do, I want to process that array and show that list of users in the UI. For that, I have to do the DOM manipulation. Find this particular UL or LI or this particular table and bind this event or bind this array object. We'll be looping through the array data, create the DOM element and append to this particular class. This is how we will be doing. And if I'm editing anything over there, what I want to do, I have to do the $change event. If any change happens, again get the data and bind it to the model, right? So it is really difficult. If I want to apply or if I want to get the model also, I have to do the process, right? I don't want to do it. So instead of that, in Angular.js, they are having one thing called two-way binding. So what will happen, if you are just binding the data from your controller, automatically it will be updated in the UI. In the same way that in Angular.js they are creating as a directive, you can include those directives in your HTML view, like a tag only. It will be like ng-click. ng-click is a directive or ng-controller is a directive. So you just call the directive and you can perform some kind of operation. These are all the inbuilt operations they built on Angular.js using these directives. Okay, I have this inbuilt operation. Then why do I need to use these custom directives, or what does it mean by custom directives? I have ng-click. I want some kind of new functionalities, right? So if I want to do those kind of new functionalities, you can create your own directive. However, Angular.js developer has created, in the same way, you can create your own directive and you can access it in your application. It is not only for your application. If you are thinking that directive is really generic directive, other people also can access, means you can publish those things to the bower. So if you are publishing it in the bower, so whoever wants, just they will be taking the directive from the bower and they will be accessing it. Next one, services and factories. So normally if you guys are going for an interview or any webinar, there will be this question, what is the difference between service and factory? I will be answering for that also. So why do we need to use this service and factory? If you want to share the data between multiple controllers, okay, if I have only one controller, in the controller I will be having the scope variable. So the scope variable, it will be having all the data, I can share it. But I have multiple controllers, right? Sibling controllers I have. How can I share the data between the sibling controllers? For that, you have to use this factory or service. So what is, okay, for this I will be using factory or service. What is the difference between these two? Whoever worked on the pure JavaScript, they get to know you can create an object with only the normal curly way, like just we'll be creating one object like object of name colon Dinesh and say hello colon function of whatever the function, right? So we can call this object.name or object.say hello. So I'll be getting the things done. But other way of doing it, I can create it as a function. I will be creating a new instance of the function. I can call that instance. Then I will be accessing those objects. This is the two way. In the same way, in services, if you see, in the factories, if you see, they will be directly calling this providers, and provider will be giving you the direct data. You can access it in your controller. But in the services, what it will be doing, internally, it will call the factory. Factory will create a new instance of that particular service. So that is the difference. In the service, each and every, it will be having the instance of your data in the service, but the direct data will be available if you are using factory. That is the major difference. Next one is filters. Okay, so I have some kind of data. I want to apply filter on the data. I get a very minimal amount of data. So normally if you have 100 records, just give me some record where it starts with DIN. Okay, for that what we will be doing, we will be making a query to our SQL. In SQL where data starts like, give me this one. Then we will be showing that on the UI. That is, again, it is a bit costly. You have to make a server-side call and you have to query the DB also. Instead of that, what I'm going to do, just give me all the data, whatever you have in the query. I mean, give me all the data means don't get like 10,000 or 20,000 data, but if you are storing, loading 10 or 20,000 data points on your UI, browser will be crashed. That is a trouble. So instead of that, if you have only 100 or 200 data, just get all the data, have it in the browser. Whenever user type, you can use this internal Angular.js filters to filter the data. The next one is, I can have some kind of dates, right? So in the server side, if you see, they will be having like 110021 something. So they will be having the data object only. If I show that data object to the UI, that doesn't make sense. User can't understand it. I want to format the date. give the proper date to the user, right? So for that we'll be using some kind of external module like moment.js or anything else to format. Instead of that, AngularJS itself is having its own date filters, which converts the normal data object to the date with whatever format you are giving. For example, I want to create it like MMMYYYDD. So you can create it in the same way. Reverse also, if you want to create all the formats, you can create it using this filters. Next one is routings. So we discussed about this routing, like if you want to do kind of page navigation in a single page itself, I wanted to load multiple pages over there as a partials. So for that you will be using this routings. Next, the main thing is a dependency injection. So in the application, I don't want to have everything in a single app. Instead of that, what I will be doing, I will be creating multiple apps. So whatever app I need, I will be injecting those apps or those modules into the another module. That is what we are calling it as a dependency injection. For example, we can take this ng router. So always you won't be having this ng router in this file. Whenever I wanted to use, I will be including this ng router as a dependency injection to our HTML file. Okay, that is what the dependency injection. Next one is testing. So this unit testing is really important because mostly all the server-side developers will be doing their unit testing, but not the UI developers. So if you are building any methods, you have to write a unit test case. Then only the test coverage will be fulfilled, right? So if I'm making any other small mistake also, it will be covered in this unit test. It will be captured in this unit testing, and you can fix it. So whatever the issues will be producing, that will be really less. So if you are using this AngularJS, you can write your unit test cases using Karma and Jasmine two frameworks. If you are using these kind of two things, we will be creating our own unit test cases for AngularJS application. So now we are going to see how to build a responsive AngularJS page. Before that, if you have any other questions, please post your questions on your window. We will spend 5 minutes for your questions. From Dinesh Ramakrishnan, we have one question. So he's from Struts background. He's handling with the Java Bean model action controller invoking. So is there any suggested equivalent here also? Exactly. So model means you will be having only the data. That is what we will be calling it as a model. Next, the controller, wherever you will be writing your logic. Okay, that is what we are calling a controller right here in the AngularJS. So in theory, it might be a little bit confusing. Whenever we go for this practical part over there, I will let you know what does it mean by model and what is it the controller, how can we handle those things. From Santosh, we have a question. Is AngularJS controller uses web services to get the data? Exactly. Because we are not going to write any other code on the server side. It is only for the client side. In server side, they will be exposing the web APIs. Once they expose the REST APIs, you can call the REST APIs using $HTTP module. So $HTTP module, call this API. From the API, we will be getting the data. From Surender, we have a question. What is the difference between responsive UI and fluid UI? So it is about a CSS question. Okay, no issues. I will be answering it. So responsive means whenever you are loading your application in a smaller devices like a mobile or tablet, what will happen? It won't shrink your application. The data positions will be modified. For example, just consider I have 4 boxes on my row. Okay, I am viewing in the normal system. Then if I view the same page on the tablet or mobile, what will happen? I won't be having 4 boxes on a row. I will be having only 2 boxes on the first row, second 2 boxes on the second row. So here what is happening? Data position itself modified. We are not shrinking the data. The data will be as expected, whatever it is there. It will be in the same size, but the position will be changed. That is what we are calling as a responsive. But the fluid, the data will be in the same position, but it will be smaller. So if you want to view it in the mobile, you have to zoom it. Then only you can view. Okay, this is what the difference between responsiveness and the fluid design. From Surender, we have a question. Can we create a sessions in AngularJS? So you can create sessions only on the server side. You can't create the sessions. Instead of that, if you want to handle the data, if you want to store the data in the client side, you can create local storage or session storage. That is a HTML5 feature. You can access those things in the AngularJS application. It won't be a the exact sessions whatever you are creating on the server, but we can accomplish the same functionality using session storage or local storage. From Sandeep Saxena, we have a suggestion like a bcrypt would be taking time and decrease the performance because we need a security. For example, if I want to build a banking application, in banking application, security is the main thing. So I can't just transfer the data without any other encrypting techniques. So at that time, I will leave my performance. I will look for only the security. So at the time, whatever data I want to process or I want to send it to the server, I will be using this bcrypt to encrypt the data, and I will it will affect the performance a little bit, not to the external level. Manata, we have a question. Is it non-blocking architecture? Exactly. JavaScript, everything is a non-blocking mechanism only, and one more thing, it is asynchronous. It won't wait for the first function to complete and to the next level. So the Java or .NET, everything is asynchronous programming. So what will happen is first it will execute the first line of code. Once the first line of code is done, then only it will come for the next. But here it is not like that. For example, the first function is taking 3 seconds to run it. My second function will be taking only 2 seconds to run. So what will happen whenever you run this thing? First, second function will give the result. Next only, first function will give the result. So this is what we are calling it as a non-blocking mechanism. So AngularJS also is a non-blocking mechanism. Okay, from Ananta we have one more question. So we'll take the last question. Later we can go for this practical part. So can you also explain the different components like bower, npm node? So this bower, npm and these things will be downloading the components for our client or server. Will be using these kind of modules. npm is only for to download the server side components. Whatever you want to access it in your node, you can download it with the npm. This bower, if you want to download any other client side components, you will be using this bower. So to install these things, you have to install first node in your machine. npm will come with the node. So once you install the npm, using this npm, you can install this kind of bower components. Okay, so that's enough for the theory part. Let's go for practical. So I know I didn't answer for many questions. I can see those questions. Once we complete the session, if you have time, I will be answering for all your questions. Okay, so let's build first AngularJS app. So what I'm going to do, let me take my editor. So this is a normal Sublime editor. I will be using it. I will be opening it from the beginning. First, I'm going to create one dummy folder, example 1. So what I need is, first if I want to start this AngularJS program, I need to get AngularJS minified version of the file or just AngularJS file from this angularjs.org. So already I have downloaded the file, so I'll be taking it. My angularjs.min file is available right here. Now you open in the browser. If you are using Chrome, just you can get all the things from this debugger tool. This is what the debugger tool. If you press F12, automatically it will come up. So whenever I click on the source, I will get to know what are all the source I have loaded over here. I don't have even a single source. Now what I want to do, I want to load this AngularJS file as a source. Now I'm going to include the script wherever I have this file. Source equal to Angular.min.js. I just included the AngularJS file as a script for my HTML page. So just if I refresh, you will get to know, okay, we have loaded this AngularJS min also over here. Now what will happen, once you load this Angular.min.js, it will look for ng app directive. If it finds this ng app directive, it will consider this application as a AngularJS application. Otherwise, it won't be considered as an AngularJS application if you include this AngularJS file also. Now I want to mark this application as an AngularJS application. So I'm going to include ng app. Ng app I included. So before that, let me show you one more thing. What I'm going to do, I'm just doing some kind of operation like 1 plus 1. So what it has to do is, it has to add this number and it has to give. If I'm not using AngularJS, it won't do that, just it will print it in the browser. Let me refresh. You can see it is not at all adding this, it is giving the same 1 plus 1. Because I have mentioned the Angular min, but I'm not marking my application as an AngularJS application. If you want to mark, I have to mention ng app directive. So I'm going to include ng app directive. Ng app. So I just included my ng app directive over here. Now let me refresh. When I refresh, instead of 1 plus 1, it is giving the result, clear result, whatever I needed. 2, right? So this is what we are calling it as a expressions in Angular.js. So in the double braces, whatever you are passing, it will be evaluated and it will be giving the result. Okay, now I mentioned the basic ng app. Instead of that, I want to give ng app with a kind of specific name, then I can want to create the controllers also. So how can I do? So ng app will take some parameters. So in the ng app, I'm giving some options. I'm going to call it as a demo app. So just demo. I'm going to create one more script. So it's equal to just app.js. So I have to create a new file, save it as app.js. Now how can I instantiate this ng demo? What I'm going to do, where app equal, just this is the way we'll be creating a variable in JavaScript. We'll be using only if app, where app equal to Angular dot module of, I don't want this, module of whatever the name you have given right here, demo, and pass the empty braces. So if you want to pass any other dependencies, we'll be passing into the dependencies, but I don't want to make any other dependency. I want to create a simple application. That's why I'm giving just empty braces. It is done. So now also if you refresh, it will give the same result. But if you are not giving this line, means it will give a error. I can show you that error message. I'm not going to instantiate my application. So whenever I refresh, you can see it in the console, it is throwing error, injector module error. So what does that mean is, so we are initiated one module called demo, but that is not at all available anywhere. So that is why this error is stated. That is a modular error. So if you are getting this kind of errors, you can check whether you have injected your application properly. So then just go over here. I'm going to make it proper. Refresh. The error is gone. It is giving this result. Okay. Now this is fine. I want to create a controller for my application. How can I create? Angular.js controller app.controller. So first pass the name of the controller. I'm going to call it as a demo CTRL. Demo CTRL. Then what are all the things you want to use it in the controller? You can specify over here. I want to use the scope, $scope, and the same $scope pass it here also. Whenever we minify these files, we will be using this $scope. What will happen? So this is the original dependency, and if you want, instead of, I don't want to call it as a $scope, I want to call it as just A as a $scope. So I can pass only A. So A will act like a $scope. That's why we are using in this particular way. Now I'm going to define some value. Scope dot name equal to hello. Done. So right here again, now we create the controller, but we have to inject that controller in our application. Then only I can able to access those controllers. So how can we inject that controller in our application? To inject the controller, so you can inject this controller anywhere. The app and controller, you can inject it anywhere in your application. I'm going to inject it in the body. Ng controller equal to, so whatever controller you created, that is demo controller, right? So demo CTRL. Now right here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create first I will show you the data whatever are available in this name scope variable. So just I printed this, save it, and let me refresh the browser. Whenever, let me have it as a bigger text, so it will be clear. That's why. So whenever I refresh, whatever data I passed from the controller, automatically it has been binded it in the view, right? I'm not at all doing anything. Just I'm mentioning the controller name in the expression. The expression is rendering the data and it's giving the result. It is really simple. Okay, it is not the way. So we are talking about the two-way binding. What does it mean? So what I'm going to do, let me create input file. Input type equal to text. It will access one directive called model. ng model equal to, I am going to pass the same model, whatever we are using it right here, that is name. So what will happen in the input text, however we send the value, the same way if you pass this ng model, the data will be binded to this input text area. You can change the model automatically. If you change the model, it updates the data. Now refresh, it is showing the same data over here in the text area. Now if I update this data, automatically my model also will be updated. So this is what we are calling it as a two-way binding. I am just updating in my view. So this view, what is it doing is, it is updating the correspondent model. Okay, this is one of the key feature of Angular.js. Next one. So let me create the controller in this way now. So I'm going to create a div tag. So let me keep the controller right here. So I just created the controller. Now what will happen, this controller scope will be available only on this particular div, nowhere else, right? So first let me copy paste this inside the div so it will work fine as we expected. Later I will show you what will happen. Refresh. If I make any other change, automatically the change is happening in the model also. I'm just changing the view, model is getting changed. But now what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep this text box alone outside of this page, outside of this controller. I'm going to make it top. Save and refresh. Now if I make any other change in the text box, it is not at all affecting the model, because this text box model is not available in our controller scope. That is the biggest thing. You have to notice it over here. So whatever scope variable you are creating in the controller, that will be having access only in your controller scope, nowhere else. So if you want to access it everywhere on your application, you can use a $root scope. But the problem of using $root scope is it will affect the performance of your application. That's why mostly you won't be using the $root scope. We will use only this $scope variable. I will show you how to use the $root scope also. Instead of scope, I'm going to use $root scope. So let me copy paste the same. Now let's see. If you are making anything, already this input box is outside of this controller. You can see it over here. Now, but instead of a scope variable, I marked it as a root scope variable. So if you are creating any root scope variable, that will be having access in your full application. It is like instance of your Angular app, but scope is like instance of your only the controller. So the controller methods and controller view only you can control with that scope variable. But if you are declaring it as a root scope, you can control everything. But the trouble is, if you are using more on this root scope, it will affect the performance of your application. So mostly we have to try to avoid that one. If you want to share the data, instead of using the root scope variable, we can use services or factories to share the data between controllers. That is one of the best way of using controller. So next one, what I'm going to do. So let me paste the same thing inside the controller itself. I'm going to mark it as a normal scope variable. Okay, so let me create one more controller underneath that. Div ng controller equal to second controller. Then here also I'm going to show this name tag. Name tag, it is from second controller. I just marked it over there. Now let me declare the second controller also, otherwise it will throw error. App.controller, second controller, just pass the same scope variables. Scope, here also scope. But one thing what I am going to do is, I am not going to declare any other scope variable right here. So if I refresh, in the first controller, if I make any other change, automatically it will change this scope variable. So, but I am using same scope, only name only I am using in both controllers. but it is not getting affected because that controller scope will be available only on this controller alone, the first controller alone. You can't access any other scope variable on this second controller. But we can do one more thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have this second controller inside this first controller, right? So now let's see. Now refreshed. This is my first controller. Inside the first controller itself, I have my second controller. If I make any other change, the first controller scope variable also will get changed automatically. The second controller scope variable also will get changed, because this is what we are calling as a data inheritance. So it will inherit your parent controller property to the child controller. So you should be able to access your parent controller variables. But now we are going to do one more thing right here. I'll be having one more text input type. The ng model is name. Now let's see. This is my first controller in text box, second controller text box. I'm going to change the value in my first controller text box. Automatically, the data is affected in the second controller text box. Now, I'm going to change the value in the second controller text box. It's not changing the data in the first controller, because this second controller scope is only limited over here in this div alone. It can't access the first controller scope variables, but the first controller's scope will be from this to this. So the second controller also coming inside this first controller scope. So whatever the scope name you are using in the second controller, you should be able to access it from this first controller itself. So you have to understand this data inheritance when you are using this kind of parent and child controllers. But if you are having only the siblings controller, you can't share the data. Ngapp directive. It is one of the inbuilt directive available in this Angular.js. So wherever it finds this ngapp, then only it will declare this application is a Angular.js application. If it is not having your ngapp, this application won't be considered as a Angular application. Okay, that is the use of ngapp. So Ananta is asking for ng controller and ng repeat. So ng controller, where you will be writing all your business logics, and in the repeat, if you want to do some kind of looping functionalities, we will be writing it in this ng repeat. Okay, I told you we can discuss about the model and controller also, right? So let's see how can we do that. So what I'm going to do, I don't want to have this controller within a controller, just need only one controller called demo. So inside that, I want to create one model where scope.users, whatever data you are having, that is what we are calling it as a model. I'm going to have some kind of names. One is name Dinesh. I'm going to have a second name and third name. So second name I'm going to call it as Ananta. Third name Ratish. Okay, I just created some kind of array of names. I want to display these names in my application. How can I do this? So this is what we are calling it as a model. And if you want to perform some kind of operations, we can process it over here. Like, okay, whether all the names are a little bit, okay, this name is length is more than this, or this kind of validations or any other business logic. If you want to perform, you can perform. Just print each and every data in a single line. So for to loop through, I will be using one directive called ng repeat. Ng repeat equal to, so whatever data you have, I have all the information in this scope variable called users. Just copy that scope variable, keep it in your repeat. then it is like a normal for loop in our JavaScript. So how do we do? Data in datas, right? In the same way, user in users. So this will be having all the object, and whenever we loop through, the first object will be there in the user in the first time, second object will be there in the second time, third object will be there in the third time. So like that we will be using users in user. Next one, I want to display that. So just display user dot name. Refresh and show the application. Whatever information we had over there, all the informations are available. But I want to make it little bit better, like a click event or other things. I have my name over here, and instead of this, I'm going to create a button. So ng click. Whenever I click on this button, I want to call the scope function called add. I'm just going to call this method. So whenever I click, I want to call this add function. So let me create one scope functions over here. $scope.add equal to function of. So what I want to do, whatever this model variable I have, I want to push the data to this. So already I have some kind of users information. If I click, I want to push that data also. So $scope.users.push whatever the new scope variable you have. So I'm just pushing the JSON object name colon your scope dot name. So it will take it from the input text box and will be pushing the data to this users model. So let me refresh. We'll be having the same model. I'm going to enter the new data. Name -1. Add, it is adding. So you are seeing right here, I'm not at all doing any other operation, right? Just I push the data out onto the model. Once I push the data, automatically it updates the UI. Again, if I click on the add the name to, the name to will be added. Right? So this is how we will be performing ng repeat in normal AngularJS application. From Ananta again we have a question. How many such a directive we have? So there is n number of directives are available. If you ask me some important directives, one is ng app, controller, ng repeat, show, hide, or mouse over, like this. We have n number of directives. If you want to go through all the directives, you just go to angular.org. You will get to know all the directives of all the ng directives. So again, we have one question from Ananta. That is, when do we need to call the server? Okay, so I have this data. If I refresh, let me refresh the page. All the data, whatever I added, it is gone. So I want to have the data in this UI itself. For that, whenever you add the data, you make a call to the server. You can store those information in this backend. That is in the DB. So again, whenever you are coming to this page, just instead of showing the data like this, query your DB, show the data in the UI. So for that you have to expose your web APIs. Just what the exposed web APIs, you can consume it using $HTTP. From Anshul Modi we have a question. This list will be lost if you refresh the page. How can we save this data? So to save this data only, we have to use any other server-side components using Java, Node, or Microsoft. You can write a program, server-side program. So whenever user clicks on add, you just call that server-side program, store the data in the DB, again show that information over here. So what will happen? If you refresh the page also, again we will be fetching the data from the DB. The data will be available in the DB. You can get it from there. So if you do it in that way, you can avoid it. From Sudhir Kumar, we have a question. So Sudhir is asking, how can we use a factory in this app? Let me show you a small demo. So if you want to use the factory, however we created a controller, in the same way you can create factory, app.factory. Just pass the factory name. I want to pass the factory name as a, just I'm going to call it as a service. Then if you want to use any other dependencies, you can pass it over here. I don't want any dependency, just I'm emptying it. Then I am going to return some data or function service, right? So as we discussed, factory will return an object. It won't return a function, right, or instance. So I'm going to create an object where service, you can call whatever you want. You need not to call it as a service itself. If you want, you can call it as a data or whatever. Just I'm going to call this as a data. So data equal to object of, here I'm going to store name Dinesh, right? So if we want to access this name, what I will be doing, I will be injecting this factory to my controller. So this is how we will be injecting the factory. I'm just passing that factory to my controller, and that should be available right here also. Then what you can do, so if you want to access this particular name, right? So here instead of hello, I'm going to pass service dot name. Now refresh the page. It is giving that name, whatever I added in the factory. I'm going to change it to something else. If I change to Sudhir, now let me refresh. It is getting the Sudhir from this factory. So this is how we will be using factories in Angular.js. So from Anushul Modi, we have a question: can we save the data directly to the JSON instead of DB? So otherwise, what you can do, you can store it in the browser memory itself using local storage. Using the local storage, you should be able to load the data. So Pramod is asking for how can we load partials in our Angular.js application. That's what we are calling it as a single page applications. Okay, let's go for those things. So already created a program because we have only 20 minutes. We have to cover it. So first let me show you how to create the directive. So what I'm going to do is, I want to create one directive which I can draw kind of a graph, like a line graph or a bar, whatever this kind of graphs I can use. For that I want to create a directive. So normally we'll be using C3 and D3 for the directives, but whoever wants to create the graph, they should have the knowledge on this C3 or D3.js. Instead of that, if we have two developers, one developer knows the C3, D3 and another one don't have any other knowledge. So what you can do, the developer who knows the C3, D3, they can create one directive for all kind of chart. So whoever wants, just they will be passing the data to the chart and they should be able to render the information. Now you can see the same way I created a controller demo, and it is having one controller called a parent controller. It is a PC. This you need not to know for now. Just okay, let's have it. So you can create alias name also for the controller. So that is, we are not going to cover it in this particular webinar. That's why. So just parent controller, I'm going to call it as a PC, because each and every time I can't call like parent controller dot data or parent controller dot py data. So that's why I'm going to call it as a just PC, and whatever libraries I wanted to load, I have all the informations right here. Now you can see one tag here, C3 line. Okay, there is no tag is available like C3 line in our controller. So that is our own tag we created, right? So for the tag, we have to mention, okay, this tag should look like this, or they should perform like this. How can we do it? So if you see it in our custom.js, we created a directive. So you can see it right here. We created a directive called C3 line. Whatever we used in HTML, same C3 line, and in the directive we will be adding some kind of mandatory methods. This is the first one, restrict. So what is the type of your directive? It can be an element, attribute, or a class. So first we are mentioning this type of the directive as a element. That's why it is E. Next, if I want to pass any other data from my controller, I want to access them. Because this is outside of your controller, you won't be having scope to access your controller variables, right? So we'll be passing the data from our controller. That data will be available in this scope method. So if you are passing any data, you can pass it to this data object. Next one is the link function. Once the data is loaded or once the directive is loaded, automatically it will come for this link function. Over here, I have created a basic C3 graph. C3.generate and just bind the data, whatever X column, Y column and the data you have, you just generate it, right? So this will be developed by a widget developer. So whoever wants to use the widget, what they need to do is just they will use that widget C3 line. Okay, so if you open the index.html, just I'm opening the C3 line and I pass the particular data, whatever data I wanted to pass it for this widget. So let's see what is the data I'm passing from this app. So if you see right here in the controller, custom.js, okay, let me close it so it will be confusing. So in the controller I am passing X and Y value, so I should be able to plot the graph. So this is the data, I have it in the controller. I am passing this data to my view. In the view, I am using one directive called C3 line. For this C3 line, whatever we need to do, all the business logics, all the requirement I created using custom directive. And I wanted to use that directive. So let's see how it is rendering on the page. Let's go open this on the browser. If you see this normal line, it is creating a line chart, right? So, but whoever using this directive, they knows only C3.line. They don't know what is happening in behind. This is how we normally, however, we create abstract classes in our Java. In the same way, we will be creating this kind of directives. Behind this directive, whatever it is there, they don't know. So just they will be using the directive. If you are creating as an external module as a directive, you can just inject the directive to the app. Then you should be able to access these kind of directives in your Angular.js application. The second directive also we created as a C3 pi, and for that I am passing some kind of pi information. So C3 pi also there should be a directive. So if you go down, we have one more directive called C3 pi, which is having the same kind of restrict E and link function. This will be having all the C3 logics over here. So whoever wants, just they will call the C3 hyphen pi directive. It will render the information. So what you have to know about it is, just if I change any other value, now I'm showing 123, 433 and 533. The same information will be available right here. So it will be converted into the percentage, that data is available. But if I change it, instead of 533, I'm going to call it as something like this. Now I change this one. So GitHub data should be more. If you refresh, now you can see the GitHub data is more and FB and Twitter data is very less. Now I made a change in my controller scope variable. So automatically that is making change on this custom directive also. So this is how we will be creating custom directives using Angular.js. Now let's see how can we create partials or how can we use UI router on Angular.js. So let me open this UI router. Here what I'm going to do is I just created one basic router, right? So just you just consider it as a menu. One is called a home, another one is called the contact. So whenever user clicks on this home, the URL becomes /hash/home. This here /contact. So here I have one more part UI view. So whatever HTML I have, everything has to be loaded right here on the view. This is what I need, nothing else, right? But this has to have some kind of configurations or the partial locations and other things. So if you open this custom.js, you'll get to know in our first example, we had this as a empty dependency because I don't want to use any other dependencies in my application. But now I wanted to use UI router as a dependencies to my application. That's why I'm injecting UI router over here. So once I injected this UI router, all the providers or factories, whatever you have in this router, everything you can access it. Now this UI router is having one provider called $state provider and another one is $URL provider, right? So this using the $state provider will be configuring this app. So $state provider dot state of whatever you wanted to pass. If it is a name and the state name, we are creating a new state for it, and if the URL is /home, load this template, or if the URL is /contact, load this particular template, like that. So we are creating the partials, right? So instead of a template, if you have it as a HTML file, you can create template URL. You can give that HTML path also. That is also possible over here. Now this is the only one thing you have to know. Using this $state provider, we will be configuring this application. If my URL becomes /home, load this template. /contact, load this, like that. So instead of seeing right here, let's see it in the browser. So let me open it in the browser. Okay, now you can see I'm going to delete this /home. Okay, so whenever I delete this /home, automatically it is coming back. How is it happening? So if you see our configuration file, if the URL is not matched with the mentioned URL, so here you mentioned only /home, /contact, test and test1. If the URL is not available, what will happen is it will redirect to /home. That's what we are mentioning right here. In URL provider, if it is not available with the down mentioned URL, just redirect to /home. /home will be available here. So you should be able to load this particular template. So if I comment it out, now refresh, let me delete this home. So once I delete it, you can see right here, it is not loading that home page because we don't have any other default routes over there. That is the thing. But if I click on this home, you know what will happen? That is a normal anchor tag. So the anchor tag will add one URL called /home. If I click on the contact, it will add one URL called /contact. So then in our configuration we mentioned if the URL is having a /contact, it will check only after this hash. Okay, so after this hash, if the URL is /contact, so we mentioned that configuration. So if it is a /contact, load this template, div inside contact template and one more sub state. That's what we mentioned over here. So whenever this one, it is loaded inside contact template and one more substrate over here. If I go to home, it will load that home template. So this is what we are calling it as a partials in Angular. Instead of this normal direct straightforward, what you say, templates, you can give your template URLs also. Do you guys have any other questions regarding ng router or this custom directive? From Chiranjeevi, we have a question. Can you explain what is the difference between factory and service? Sure, Chiranjeevi, I will do that for you. So we have seen the example of factory. So in factory, what we did is we just passed the full data, right? So if you are using factory, we'll be passing the whole data. But if you are using the service, we'll be passing the instance. If you see the architecture of the service, so what it will do, first let's see the factory. Factory just return the provider. So the provider will return whatever data you mentioned it in your factory. But if you see the service internally returns the factory. Again, factory returns the instantiated data, whatever you have. This is what happened. So what is happening? You have to understand anyway the service also internally throwing the factory, then why do I need to go for it, right? So if you want to improve the performance or better way, you can directly use the factory itself. But if you want to access with the instance, right, so that time you have to go for this services. From Naveen, we have a question. Can we also use foundation CSS framework like Bootstrap? Yes, Naveen, you can use whatever you want. That doesn't matter. So this AngularJS is only the part of JavaScript work. So if you want to go for this foundation CSS framework, you can go over this foundation. You can use it in your application. But you have to remember one more thing. We have one more module called Angular Step. So what it will do, this Angular Step will be having all these Bootstrap JavaScript files. So if you are using this Angular Step, it requires Bootstrap CSS alone. If you don't want to use Angular Step in your application, directly you can use only Angular.js and Bootstrap CSS framework. That will work fine. From Sudhir, we have a question. Can I use dynamic data in the factory using HTTP methods? Exactly, Sudhir. You can have the dynamic methods. So what I will show you how we used to write it in the real-time projects. I will go back to the same example whatever we used. So in the example what we have done is we just returned the direct data. I don't want to do that. So I want to get this name from the database, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pass $HTTP as a dependency. But now I don't have any of the database, so I can't get the data. I will show you how to write $HTTP. Here, just create one function get name. So get name, what it will do is it will make $HTTP of. So this is how we'll be creating a $HTTP method. So I want to get the data, so I will be creating a get method. So get and my URL /API/user. So I will be doing like this. What I'm doing, just in the get name, I'm going to return a function. Alright. I'm going to return a function which return a HTTP object. So if I want to get the name in my application, what I will be doing is just I will be taking this one service dot get name. So the get name is the next one more object. That's it. Get name dot success, because it is returning the HTTP method. So the HTTP method will be having success and error method. So success which will be having the function callback function. So I will be having a response. I can go with this response, or I can go with the error method which will be having a response error. I will be just displaying the error message. So this is how we will be using effectively we'll be using factories in AngularJS application. From Venkat, we have a question. Is this recorded video or live stream? So Venkat is it is a live stream. Anyway, this recorded video also will be available in our Edureka website. You can just go to the site, you can see these videos. The recorded version will be available over here. But now whatever happening, it is a live stream. Okay, so we came to the end of the session. We have only last 2 minutes. We'll take the last question from Rakesh. So the question is, can you tell me about promises in AngularJS? Sometimes what I want to do, whatever the request and response handling, I want to do with this promises. In this, to access the promises in AngularJS, we have $Q service which returns the promise. Okay. So in this $Q service, we will be having differ and the resolve methods. So using this, you can able to get the data. So I will let you know how to use the promises. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create one more function. So function I'm going to call it as a REST. So this function will be having $HTTP method, whatever I have here. $HTTP of whatever data I have. Then before this, I'm going to inject one more variable also, that is called $Q. So I can use $q in my factory. So using this $q only you can access your promises. So in this REST, I'm going to create my differ method. So which will be having $q.differ. So using this differ only, you can resolve or reject your promises. Once if it goes to the success, I'm not going to write it properly. So if it goes to the success, what you can do, you can make it as differ.resolve. Whatever data you are getting from the response, you can pass it to the this one. Or if it go to the error, what you can do, differ.reject. So what you are doing, this promise has been rejected because it is going to the error method. Whatever error message you wanted to throw, just throw this. Later what you have to do, you have to return your promise. So return differ.promise. Now actually what we are doing is, we are creating a $q differ. The differ will be having resolve reject promises. So once it is resolved, automatically this promise will be passed to the particular function. On this function, you will be using the .then method. If it is success, you will be getting it in the success, or if it is rejected, you will be getting it in the second method of your then. This is how we will be using $promises in AngularJS. Okay, so we have just few more slides. Let's go through it. So we have seen how to create the first AngularJS application, just including AngularJS file, bootstrapping the app, creating the controller, and running the application. This is how we'll be writing our first Angular app. Next, we built a basic single page application, whatever things we use, that is a text editor, browser, Node.js, MongoDB if you want to have. So we didn't create this app. Instead of that, we have seen kind of directives and other informations over here. So that's all we have seen the demo. And this is how we built our first program. First we have seen what does it mean a single page application. Then we have seen some of the AngularJS features. Then we used these kind of things in our, covered this kind of things in our session. One is AngularJS features like routing, two-way binding, factories, services, and other things. Next, we have seen what does it mean, what is AngularJS and what does mean SPA, and we built a basic application. Okay, so do you guys have any questions? We'll take last two questions. If you guys have any other questions, please post your question. So from Naveen, we have a question, any handouts over here. So all the programs what we used, everything will be available in our Edureka. So if you want to get this kind of programs, what you can do, you can send out mail to our support team. So they should be able to help you. Do you guys have any other questions? If we have any questions, we can continue. Okay then, really thank you very much guys for attending this AngularJS webinar. I know I almost answered for all of your questions, and still if you have any other questions, you just post your questions to the support team, or you can mention it in our Edureka. And Edureka, we are offering AngularJS course also. If you want to know about this course, just go to our edureka.co. Over there you should be able to get all this AngularJS program details and course details also. Once again guys, thank you very much for this attending this wonderful AngularJS webinar. Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye bye.